comes to your mind when you think of Mexico? Crystal waters and white sands on the beach? The fiery taste of a taco? The festiveness of a mariachi band? The calloused hands of a farmer? Or perhaps the presidential candidate, Donald Trump?
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best.
In truth, Mexican identity is not defined based on how others perceive Mexicans to be, but rather how Mexicans describe themselves and their cultural personality. After hundreds of years of conflict, Mexican Expressionism, an art movement in the 1920s and 40s, helped the Mexican people come to grips with their unique identity after the revolution. Artists encountered the harshness and the beauty that existed in Mexican daily life and explored powerful, emotional visions to elucidate themes from classism, racism, and sexism to escapism, spirituality, and euphoria. The exchange of cultures in the Mexican Expressionist work allowed for its international impact, incorporating European Cubism and Surrealism, as well as Mayan and Aztec indigenous figurativism and exaggerated features to create fascinating universes. This vibrant movement spread throughout Latin America and inspired other neo-expressionism and abstract expressionism revolutions that happened in the United States of America. It was the most influential art movement in Latin America of the 20th century. During the 18th century, Spanish and Iberian culture dominated over Mexico with Baroque art and Western religion. This created a racial caste system that placed native Mexicans on the bottom and those with fairer skin on top. This cultural exclusion was obvious even in the 1920s and 30s. The aftermath of the Mexican Revolution brought much political instability, to the point where Mexican citizens were more confused than ever as to what it meant for the future of their country, and seek to fill a void inside of themselves.
Mexican Revolution. And that, Nico, is the time of your great-grandparents. My grandfather fought in the Mexican Revolution, so for me it has a personal significance that affected thousands or hundreds of thousands of families. But the movement was basically peasants, farmers, the poor against the landlords who oppressed them.
So why did Mexicans adopt Expressionism to help them find their cultural voice? Well, Expressionism is an art genre that was founded in Germany in 1910 when a group of individuals became increasingly concerned with humanity's disconnect from the spiritual world. As such, it embodied the emotional experience of an event and was a reaction against French Impressionism, which showed the physical glimpse of something. Both Vincent van Gogh and Edvard Munch are considered pre-expressionists. One of the first major Mexican expressionists is a man named José Clemente Orozco, who was shown painting Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla, a Catholic priest who fought in the War of Independence in Mexico. As you can see, Orozco is very involved with the pursuit of justice and liberty, which are persistent themes in his work. Orozco had a very progressive perspective on politics. With most of Mexico being Roman Catholic, he often made biblical connections to Mexico history in his work. For example, he portrayed Hernán Cortés as a metallic knight who had slain a very passionate man. This not only represents the Spanish Inquisition threatening the nature of Mexican Indian life, but has also been interpreted as the industrial cross dehumanizing Jesus Christ. Similarly, Diego Rivera provided his own political insight upon Mexican society. Though he was persuaded otherwise by his peers and even the Mexican government, Rivera wanted to portray the Mexico he knew with the Mexican style he loved, not European technique. He projects the beautiful and complex dynamic of mestizo, or mixed life, through large murals and public spaces. Rivera's work explores social unrest and inequality, but also depicts the veins of Mexico in its most profound state and the divinity around it. It shows the complicated relationships between humans, nature, and God. His work attempts to describe Mexico's grace when words fail. Rufino Tamayo, an expressionist of Zapotec heritage, sought to express the common life of native Mexico. He used natural pigmentation as well as indigenous hybrid styles, which combined half animal and half man creatures to create a distinct character. While Tamayo claimed that his work was not political and that it served to express the treasures of Mexican life in a raw and earthy way, in its existence, his work rebelled against the previous Spanish manner and white favoritism. The work of David Alfaro Siqueiros was more based on the political state of Mexico rather than its cultural state. Siqueiros was a Marxist and believed that communism was the answer in an uncertain Mexico. His work was provocative and fierce, as he was trying to communicate some of the consequences that have happened and would happen when not unified under a system of communism and equality.
The interesting thing about Mexican Expressionism is the diversity. Take Frida Kahlo, for instance, a daughter of a German immigrant and a Mexican woman. She found a very different way to define herself as both a Mexican and a woman through her art. While her husband, Diego Rivera, took on a more global public image of what she did, she nurtured her pain and used that as a woman to paint about issues of femininity, of Mexican beauty, and what it meant to be trapped in a world full of men. She poured her heart out and led onto her canvas. It was a very, very personal, very visceral form of communicating with the world of what it meant to be her.
I knew maiden aunts of mine who would never say buttocks. They would die before saying buttocks. They would say, those on which I sit. Mm-hmm. They would even say legs. Legs was too daring for them. They say, those with which I walk. Things like this, absurdities like this, were part of the formalities of Mexican city middle-class life, against which the lifestyle of Frida Kahlo and Los Cachuchas and Diego Rivera and Maria Izquierdo and all the rest of them rebelled and said, we're going to be free. We're going to express ourselves freely. We're going to love freely. We're going to create freely. We're going to speak freely. And that was a big break with this puritanical past of semi-colonial Mexico, let's call it.
Mexican Expressionism was a Latino renaissance that celebrated indigenous culture. Upon encountering the balance of bitterness and sweetness in Mexican society, artists explored to embody these issues in a personal, passionate light, not only with new visions, but with tools like muralism, surrealism, and nationalism. These artists used a genre from Germany, methods of the native Mexicans, and themes of the Iberian civilization. One canvas showed the exchange of traditions and history woven together to create a complete masterpiece. Naturally, this influential movement of politics and creativity spread outside of Mexico. European artists Joseph Albers, Edward Burra, and European photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson all learned about the Mexican art scene and returned enriching their communities with what they had learned. David Alfaro Siqueiros established an experimental workshop in New York, which American artist Jackson Pollock would attend, and become ignited to reject easel painting just as the Mexicans had done and focus on abstract expressionism. This inspired Mexico's next generation, as well as other Latin American countries, to embrace their roots. For understanding more about the roots teaches you how to grow as a tree. Art is an idea that is vast, beautiful, scary, and complex. And when wielded by Mexico's finest, there are no borders or limits. There is only a canvas to fill.